Okay. Hello, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good afternoon, depending on the zone you are. Welcome to our webinar hosted by Journal Nutrients by MDPI. This webinar is titled Correlation Between Nutrition and Kidney Stones. And today, just first, before starting, I will give you a short introduction about MDPI. MDPI is an editorial, it's a publishing house, which is a pioneer in open access publishing. MDPI supports open science by the open access model of publishing. It started in 1996 in Basel, which is in Switzerland, and it has this mission of fostering open scientific exchange in all forms across all disciplines. Currently, MDPI publishes 473 open access journals, from which 464 are peer-reviewed, and also we have 9 conference journals. Overall, more than 295,000 people, academic experts who are collaborating day by day with MDPI on sharing these values, this commitment to high quality publishing, but also to open access publishing. This is very important for us because we believe that science has to be shared and has to be open for everyone. This journal Nutrients is one of these more than 400 journals we have in MDPI, and it's an international peer-reviewed journal, which is, of course, open access, and it's based on human nutrition, and it's published monthly. One of the associated affiliated societies to this journal is the Italian Society for Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Nutrition, but there are many others. What we will be talking about today, I will introduce our chair, Dr. Pier Giorgio Bolasco. He will introduce his talk titled Food Additives, a New Entry in Diagnosis of Kidney Stone Disease, followed by Dr. Giovanni Gambaro. He will talk about understanding kidney stone formation, the role of nutrition. The next talk will be Dr. Matteo Bargagli, dietary strategies for prevention of recurrent kidney stones, and also an interesting talk by Dr. Danny Gohel, popular diets and risk of kidney stones. Along all 4 talks, you are entitled to go to the Q&A box in the chat, not the general chat, but the Q&A box in Zoom. You can type your questions in any of the 4 talks, and after them, I will give access to the chair so there can be the answer to these questions and also some debate. And in the end, Dr. Pier Giorgio Bolasco, our chair, will close the webinar. This webinar is related to a special issue. This special issue is a collection of monothematic of related papers that are published under the title of Nutrition Approach in Kidney Stone Diseases. You can access the journal webpage, which is Nutrients. This special issue has a deadline in 5th of November. So remember, this 5th of November is the deadline to publish papers related to this title, Nutrition Approach in Kidney Stone Diseases, which is this special issue guest edited by the chair of this webinar, Dr. Pier Giorgio Bolasco. You will have access to the link of this special issue in the chat during the talks. And also we recommend you to visit them and to propose your submissions to this special issue. Once again, I remind you that you can place your questions to the speakers in this box, Q&A, you will find in the toolbar of Zoom, not in the chat. In the chat is a place of free speech where you can talk about anything. But if you want your questions to be answered by the speakers, you have to place them in the Q&A box. Dr. Pier Giorgio Bolasco has more than 47 years of experience in this field. He belongs to he's related to the Italian Society of Nephrology in Cagliari, in Italy, and has national acknowledgement to be an associate professor in this field. And I think that maybe it's high time that Professor Bolasco will himself present his talk and also introduce our other speakers, Dr. Gambaro, Dr. Bagagi, and Dr. Goher. So please, Dr. Bolasco, can you take over and
first of all, I prefer to present first of the relation, the scholars that have to speech their relation. But first of, okay, and so I am to present that I'm talking about nephrolithiasis and rare nephrocalcinosis study group, and on behalf of the nephrocalcinosis study group, and I am very proud for this the participation of our Italian Society of Nephrology, and speak about nutrition, especially in my patient. I'm studying kidney stone from 10 years, not 47 years, of course. But in my experience in nutrition, in particular class of patients, the frequent kidney stone forming patients, and it's a delicate field of nephrology, and thank you for participating, Professor Giovanni Gambaro, Professor Danny Goel, and Dr. Matteo Bagali. And with the hope of highlighting how nutrition in various geographical areas influences this geographical isolation, influence the formation of kidney stone. Before giving the floor to my estimated colleague, I would to present some preliminary observation, not very important in the literature, that should be considered in the metabolic diagnosis of kidney stone. Is very important the influence of nutrition in kidney stone. First of all, is a particular influence on incidence of various types of kidney stone, especially in patients called frequent kidney stone formers. Nutrition is influenced by numerous factors, excessive incongruous habits in nutrition, food heritage in different parts of the world, from the west to the east. Another phenomenon is the diet segregation. Some populations live in isolated geographic areas, even in the urban context, especially in present of the growth of areas of immigrant population in cities and recently in metropolises, also taking into consideration, of course, the economic condition of the affected subjects. And lastly, is the topic of my little presentation. The new entry is the additive. The additives are ubiquitous and not well regulated in quality and quantity on foods, especially of short, medium, long shelf life, that can influence intestinal absorption and renal load, and they could confuse, in my opinion, the diagnosis laboratory ratios. In Europe, additives may be identified in foods by their name or by the letter. The letter E for identify additive in Europe is E for Europe, followed by 3 digits. In recent decades, global dietary patterns have undergone profound changes. The food landscape has been made by unprecedented transformation, especially in our Western countries, in terms of food availability and then consumer demand of accessible, convenient, and appetizing options. This evolution has been driven by the combination of advanced food chain technology over the past 7 decades, resulting in an increase in ultra-processed foods. The globalization has further disseminated its product worldwide. In fact, especially in the Western diet, the foods used in many recipes belong to class 4 on NOVA classification. These foods often contain added refined sugars, salt, hydrogenous fats, and additives containing potassium, phosphorus, and sodium. These methodologies often involve extrusion, molding, frying, inclusion of cosmetic additives such colorants, flavor enhancer, emulsifier, carbonatic agents, antifoaming agents, and glazing agents to restore sensory characteristics, of course, like texture and flavor, and the original appearance, such as color, recently in 2022 by European Commission, thereby increasing product palatability. These foods contain, in a European classification, after I show the kind of additives, contain excessive in a population studied amount in additives that are, excuse me, in our patient are marked in red. You could be the very interference by foods of our patients. We recently, with a very professional statistical biostatistical colleague, conducted a very rigorous dietary survey on 50 patients, but these 50 patients are frequent kidney stone former. Thanks to thanks to the extraordinary patient cooperation in recording the food and drink consumed each day during a typical week, we led in this patient a highly accurate and verified daily diaries. Then we calculated all elements using the best validated databases in the world. The research was conducted for a very strenuous and controlled check for a long time, and the content of all elements contained in the various types of foods and liquids, of course, were correlated with the same amount equivalent elements found in the urine. There are the approved additives considered in our study. The Commission recently updated the authorization for update, not in 22, but in 2025. You see that the number and the E is potassium sulfate, potassium hydrosulfate is very common sulfate product, calcium, ammonium, and sodium. In fact, the exact amount of additives in foods remain unknown, as the assessment of the nutritional composition of foods doesn't quantify how much of certain elements comes from organic or inorganic sources. making it difficult to differentiate between naturally occurring minerals and those as additives in the foods now called ultra-processed foods. The recent, the most important update is about color in 2022. The amount is quantum satis, from Latin, of course. This, however, it is the problem is very, very complex. And first of all, we following the univariate correlation analysis, we decide to carry out a multivariate analysis to verify the correlation between the intake of the considered elements and their urea concentration by performing a multi-cross analysis of all the elements. It began to the citrates. This association between citrate and reduced presence of urinary oxalate cannot be explained solely at renal level, but probably involve genomic phenomenon, including increased citrate absorption by specific intestinal to renal transport and expressed on enterocyte brush-borne membranes. For example, for the sodium citrate class of co-transponder, specifically, for example, sodium DC1, H sodium DC. And so there are hard correlation with intake of citrate and reduction of oxaluria. About calcium, the natural dietary intake of calcium should take into account the numerous additives containing sulfur salt used in a wide range of protein foods, particularly in fried foods, including calcium, sulfate, calcium, sulfite and sulfate, calcium bisulfite, ammonium sulfate, and calcium carbonate. For example, in the cookies of the children, in the cookies biscuit of the children during breakfast contain these additives. And so this content of calcium is has been approved by FAO and FDA. But magnesium in our work, we were struck by the significance of magnesium. Is the average of urinary magnesium in our 50 patients, 93.1 milligram daily, has been shown beneficial effect in reducing urinary concentrate oxalate. All correlations are significant. And oxaluria of course, and calcium, phosphate, and these are mechanisms that probably already occur in the intestine. Multivariate regression analysis confirmed a negative correlation for the effect of magnesium on renal phosphate excretion, contributing to the elimination of approximately 8% of the calcium present at the intestinal level, and also increasing reabsorption of calcium and phosphate and phosphorus in the ascending segment of the proximal tubules. Dietary magnesium for us is very important because the dietary magnesium diminishes phosphorus renal ending and inhibits the expression of protein and tubular transport, especially important transport, chloride transported by renal receptor, and so directly influences the phosphorus, the this phosphorus, but also indirectly by inhibiting the PTH secretion. This table shows another negative correlation with magnesium, the presence of urea, azoturia, quindi nitrogen urinary. And about sulfur, the natural dietary intake of sulfur should also take into account potassium sulfate is very frequent, and potassium bisulfite is very frequent. And this product, this element, sulfur, is used in a wide range of protein food. It is particularly in these additives, and the use of this has been approved by the FAO and FDA. Our patient, however, reminded you that heritage and particularly geographical position of my island, Sardinia, this positive correlation made known only due to dietary choices and preference for plant-based food containing moderate amounts of potassium and oxalate. For example, is usual consumption of foods with an average oxalate content 25-50 milligrams per 100 grams, ranging, for example, in general population from potatoes cooked in various ways. Particularly, I remember the large use of chips. There are 100 milligrams per 100 grams of product. But in our study, we found a very common eating habit, especially in our inland population, not in the coast areas, with an extensive use of high oxalate content vegetable from 600, 800 milligrams per 1 gram, including many recipes containing raw and cooked chard and cooked wild spinach. It is a tradition for Sardinia of the inland population. To conclude, I conclude with protein intake. Of course, is azoturia and ammonuria is directly correlated with the protein intake. But I would to present you this significant correlation between the urinary nitrogen per 6.50 per kilogram of patient study. This equation proves of fecal azoturia, fecal nitrogen, derived from the famous formula by Marori and Steinman in 1985. And this extrapolate in calculated for our patient food diary, the gram per kilo day by nitrogen output, and the diary, the amount from diary of the patient. So as I ended, and thank you for your attention. And so I am the chair of a little center of calculi of especially for frequent stone formula. And so I would to get my presentation to my friend. I know Professor Giovanni Gambaro from many years. Giovanni Gambaro is a full professor of nephrology at the University of Verona in Italy. He is an ordinary council member now of the European Renal Association, and was a past chair of the Italian College of Academic Nephrology. For me, it is a pleasure honor to present the relation of Professor Giovanni. Please, Giovanni, I'm waiting you.
Thank you, Pier Giorgio, for your kind presentation. And I will share my presentation. So the topic is understanding the mechanism of stone formation, and so to address how nutrition can affect stone formation. In particular, I will discuss how stones form and how and where they form. Sorry. So the precipitation of very poorly soluble salts and the formation of some particular crystalline species is the basis for the formation of stones. And the solubility product and the supersaturation for over the solubility product of these crystalline species is an essential step for the formation of stone. And of course, stone formation is not a purely physico-chemical process, but it is also a biological process, as we will see in the next slides. The chemical physical imbalance for some of those crystalline species causing stone formation is necessary. And in this cartoon, you see here an area of undersaturation, which means that the salts are very are not very concentrated, and therefore the solubility product is well below 1, well below the supersaturation threshold. And there is no crystallization at all. And if by chance some crystal would be present in this area of undersaturation, it will rapidly dissolve. And the other interesting area is that the one of spontaneous precipitation, which means that there is a very high level of supersaturation, which allows the spontaneous homogeneous precipitation of some of the crystalline species involved in nephrolithiasis. In between, in this area, it is possible that after the crystallization, the crystal growth. In between this area of spontaneous precipitation and the area of undersaturation, there is a very frequently observed in humans, that is the metastability zone. And this means that it is not possible any spontaneous precipitation, let's say, of calcium oxalate crystals or some other phosphate, calcium phosphate crystals. But if there is a nucleus, on that nucleus, the crystal can precipitate and aggregate, and the stone can grow. The nidus could be a cellular debris, but it can also be another species, another kind of crystals. It is the case, for example, of uric acid crystal that can be in an area of spontaneous precipitation. On that nidus, in the urine that are metastabile for calcium oxalate, in that area, on that crystal, uric acid crystal, can crystallize calcium oxalate and form a calcium oxalate stone on the nidus of uric acid. This explains why the most frequent kind of stones in gouty patients, in patients with hyperuricemia, is not uric acid stone, but is a calcium oxalate stone. Supersaturation supersaturation alone fully explains cystine and struvite lithiasis and uric acid stones. What does it mean? It means that the supersaturation is self-sufficient to allow the crystallization of cystine. In this cartoon, we see that at high urine pH, even very important concentration of cystine in the urine, 1500 milligram per liter, are in a stage in supersaturation, are in an area of undersaturation. So there is no precipitation of cystine, no spontaneous precipitation of cystines. On the other hand, if the pH of the urine is reduced, then we see that this urine with a very high concentration of cystine move to an area of spontaneous precipitation and therefore the formation of stones. We also see that at a higher concentration, much higher concentration, 20 milligram per liter, there is no possibility, even at 7.5, so almost 8 urine pH, to avoid crystallization. This is also a measure that the modification of the pH is a measure that we use to maintain insolubility cystine in patients with cystinuria. And the same is true for uric acid crystallization. We see here that at very low urine pH, even very low concentration of uric acid, 250 milligram per liter, are in an area of spontaneous crystallization. But if we increase the pH, if we alkalinize urine, then we observe that even very high concentration of uric acid in urine, more than 1000 milligram per liter, are in area of undersaturation, and so no crystallization occurs. And this is the treatment that we generally perform for uric acid stone patients. But the supersaturation is not sufficient to explain calcium-containing renal stones. So there is something else further to the supersaturation of urine that explain the formation of stones. The process of crystallization of calcium crystals is very complex. We have supersaturation, we have nucleation, growth, aggregation. There is a role for some organic matrix, organic molecules. There is the need for the adhesion of crystal to cells, otherwise crystals would be flushed away, cleared by the urine flow, without any possibility to aggregate and form a stone. And further, we have inhibition. Inhibition means the concentration of the presence of citrate, which has a role in crystallization of calcium oxalate, in aggregation of calcium oxalate crystals. there is a role for an inhibiting role for magnesium, and also some organic molecules have a role in preventing contrasting the effect of supersaturation. This is why I said that the supersaturation is not self-sufficient to induce nephrolithiasis, calcium nephrolithiasis. However, this is also a demonstration that this is the case, that supersaturation is not sufficient to induce calcium oxalate formation. We see here two cartoons in men and women. And on this bar, we see the supersaturation for calcium oxalate. Well, there are quite a lot of patients, more than 50% of controlled non-stone formers that has a high supersaturation that would lead to heterogeneous in this area of the metastability or spontaneous homogeneous precipitation. This is all in non-stone formers. Of course, the stone former patients has more severe, more frequently in an area of supersaturation, but even quite a lot of healthy patients are in this area of theoretically possibility for precipitation. And we also see that in healthy subjects, in the healthy subjects of the 3 Channing cohorts in Boston, the 2 nurses cohort and the health professional male cohort of subjects, the risk of forming stone increases as long as the calcium oxalate supersaturation increases for both, and this is true also for calcium phosphate stones. And that the supersaturation is important is also demonstrated by what we saw in the patients of the Borges trial, one of the very few trials performed in nephrolithiasis. This is a very famous study demonstrating that a diet with a normal calcium intake, low protein intake, low salt, against a low calcium diet, which was the rule before the year 2002. So a diet with a normal calcium intake was more favorable in preventing stones, new stones in recurrent stone formers. Well, in this population, we analyzed this population according to what was their supersaturation after 1 week nutritional treatment began. And you see here that any reduction in the supersaturation induced by diet was predicting a less number of new events occurring. So even a small reduction in relative saturation for calcium oxalate observed after 1 week from the beginning of the treatment, the nutritional treatment, was predicting of good results. So certainly supersaturation is not self-sufficient, but it is needed for the formation of stones. So how supersaturation induces the formation of stones? It is not only a physicochemical problem, it is also a biological problem. In the tubular lumen, when there is a supersaturation for a certain crystalline species, let's say for calcium oxalate, this induces an oxidative stress, cell apoptosis, the formation of some cell debris, this can work as a nidus for the nucleation, the heterogeneous nucleation of crystals. Then we have crystal growth and aggregation, the trapping of crystal in the tubular lumen, and the occlusion of the tubular lumen. But this is, against this process, there are the effect of inhibitors. But if we reach this step, this is the typical step of a calcium oxalate nephrocalcinosis in a very high hyperoxaluria, for instance. And this is not a stone disease. Of course, nephrocalcinosis is frequently associated with renal stones, but on the other way, renal stones are infrequently, not very frequently associated with nephrocalcinosis. To occur, to form a renal stone, the process of intratubular crystal trapping should occur at the end, at the tip of the Bellini duct. This is a schematic section of a papilla, and this is a Bellini duct, and there is a physiological stricture at the end of the Bellini duct, and here some apatite stone can be trapped and aggregate, forming a plug, and the plug works as the basis, allowing the heterogeneous nucleation and crystallization of, let's say, calcium phosphate stones, sometimes also calcium oxalate stones, that can be can stuck to the plug and therefore are not flushed away by the urine flow. But this is a very particular case of stone formation. It is mainly observed in a secondary form of nephrolithiasis when we are dealing with the bruchite stone, which is bruchite is a particular crystalline form of calcium phosphate, or in distal renal tubular acidosis, or in hyperparathyroidism, or the hyperoxaluria of ileostomy, all conditions that are relatively rare in the general, so-called, in the general form of nephrolithiasis. When we are dealing with the common so-called idiopathic renal stones, which are for calcium oxalate stones, 80% of the population, of the general population, forming stone form calcium oxalate stones. We are dealing, we need a very particular condition, which are the Randall's plaques. So the Randall's plaques are interstitial deposits of calcium phosphate of apatite in the suburothelial space of the papilla. This is a papilla, and you see here that beneath the urothelium there is this structure, which is a Randall's plaque, a calcium phosphate apatite stone. We don't know exactly what is the link between the mechanism linking supersaturation to the formation of Randall's plaque, perhaps some vascular problem. We don't know. Probably it is not a pure physicochemical process. It is a biological process leading to some form of biomineralization. Anyway, as you see here, the Randall plaques, when denudated because of the disappearance of the destroyment of the urothelial covering it, when it becomes in contact with the supersaturated urine of the pelvis, if the urine of the pelvis is supersaturated, then some crystal of calcium oxalate can form on this basis, on the Randall plaque basis, and much more crystal form, aggregate, and form a stone. And then the stone, when it reaches a certain dimension, can detach and leads to the renal colic. So this is the most frequent phenomenon occurring, leading to nephrolithiasis, certainly the so-called idiopathic calcium oxalate nephrolithiasis. This is the nephroscopy imaging showing the papilla with a calcium oxalate stone attached to the Randall plaque. This whiteness is a Randall plaque that we see much more clearly on the surface of the papilla when the stone has been detached. Here is the section of this stone, and you may see here these red lines, which is what of the Randall plaques remains on the stone. And this is a section of the papilla, and this part corresponds exactly to this part where the stone were joined to the papilla, and where actually it started to form, to become a true stone. This is another image of ureteroscopic image of a papilla with a stone. The stone is detached. We see the remaining of the papilla on the stone, and that corresponded to this part of the papilla on the surface of this part of the Randall plaque on the surface of the papilla. And in this histological section, you may see the Randall plaque beneath the urothelial, papillary urothelium. So what is the role of nutritional treatment in nephrolithiasis? We approach diet to prevent renal stones because we know that modifying the eating habits, we may modify some parameters in urines, and therefore modifying the urinary risk factors for nephrolithiasis. We may affect modifying the nutrition, supersaturation. We can affect no growth of crystals, aggregation of crystals, and we may affect also inhibition of crystal growth, crystal aggregation, and crystallization. We cannot, at least we don't know how to affect the organic matrix and the crystal cell adhesion, but certainly we may affect all the other steps in red. So it is very well known that the water intake is strictly linked to the dilution of urine and therefore the supersaturation levels. We know that a higher intake of sodium means a higher calciuria and also a reduced cytokluria. In this cartoon, we see that increasing the urinary sodium, that is increasing the urinary intake of sodium, increasing by 100 millimole of urinary sodium, the urinary excretion of sodium, we increase of 1 millimole the urinary excretion of calcium. And this is even more clear in demonstrating the effect of sodium chloride. These are patients that for a few days followed a controlled diet. Then they introduce in the diet 90 millimole for 4 days of sodium chloride, and thereafter of potassium chloride and other salts. But only the sodium chloride increased significantly the excretion of calcium, the urinary excretion of calcium. Only this salt, not the others. We also know that the Mediterranean diet is an healthy diet for renal stone formers, and actually the typical content of the diet, of the Mediterranean diet, which is low simple sugars, high fruit vegetables, low animal protein, and moderate intake of calories, contrast the lithogenic risk. Simple sugars increases calciuria, fruits and vegetables have an effect on pH, urine pH, and urine citrate. The increase in animal protein have an effect on the urine pH, urine citrate, and the urine calcium. The overweight have an effect, an unfavorable effect on the urine pH and urine citrate. We also know that other nutritional risk factors affect other potential lithogenic risk. Low calcium diet increases urinary oxalate. Increased in oxalate in the diet increased oxaluria. Calcium supplements can increase urinary calcium. Vitamin C supplements can increase urinary oxalate. In reference to the calcium effect on oxaluria, in the colon, oxalate is bound by calcium, and therefore it forms calcium oxalate, which does not allow oxalate to be absorbed and therefore to leave urines, to reach urines. This is a very well-known phenomenon that is clearly demonstrated. The effect of the low calcium diet is clearly demonstrated by this cartoon. After 1 week of low calcium diet, there is a clear increase in oxaluria. And the study also demonstrated the same concept. A very low dietary calcium intake is associated to urinary oxalate, higher urinary oxalate, certainly higher than the urinary oxalate observed at a higher concentration of dietary calcium. We can imagine calcium oxalate nephrolithiasis as a puzzle. This condition is a complex disease. This means that we need a genetical background. And in fact, we know that from twin studies that approximately 50% of the pathogenesis of nephrolithiasis, of calcium nephrolithiasis, is due to the genetical background. The other 50% is due to the environmental factors, protein intake, calcium intake, sodium intake, so diet, but also sun exposition and vitamin D intake, and probably some other factors, environmental factors. So in the presence of a certain genetic background, nutrition and environment trigger the formation of calcium oxalate nephrolithiasis. But we may also have an effect of the nutrition on the genes. In fact, this is a field of the nutrigenomics. In other way, the nutrients can affect the expression of the genes. Let us first consider, for instance, the effect of nutrients on the expression of the carriers involved in citraturia or calciuria in the tubular lumen. So by modulating the methylation of the gene of those carriers, or the expression of those genes, we may affect the function of those carriers, and therefore leads to condition predisposing to nephrolithiasis. So it is not only the genetic background, which is necessary for the expression for the translation of the nutritional risk in stones, but it is also the dietary habits that can affect the expression of the genes. This is called nutrigenomics, and in particular nutri-epigenetics. There are few studies demonstrating that this concept may be true. In China, epidemiological studies demonstrated that vinegar, the use of vinegar is associated with less risk of renal stones. And there are experimental demonstrations in murine models demonstrating that acetic acid can have affect epigenetic mechanisms through non-codifying RNA, and these activities may translate in reduced urinary calcium, increased urinary citrate, probably because on the expression of those tubular carriers that are involved in calciuria and in citrate handling. And there are also the speculation that L-arginine or fructose that are very well known factors associated with reduced urinary calcium, increased urinary citrate, higher risk of renal stones, may have epigenetic mechanisms. This is that these foods have an epigenetic mechanism is known in cardiovascular disorders, but it is also, we may also speculate that it may also be true for nephrolithiasis. So in conclusion, nephrolithiasis, which is a very common condition in the general population, has a very strong rationale for the implementation of the nutritional rules and to achieve both primary and secondary prevention of renal stones. And I hope that the scientific basis and the mechanisms that I have explained are quite clear. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Giovanni. Of course, you and your school are the very skilled group in this field, and so for me it's a pleasure to hear your presentation. For question and answer at the end of the webinar, and now is the moment of Dr. Matteo Bargalli. Matteo Bargalli, of course, is an Italian citizen, but now is working in Bern in the equipe of Professor Daniel Fuster. Is specializing in nephrology with a strong interest and experience in the field of nephrolithiasis, rare kidney disease, and the group of Professor Daniel Fuster, who is a very important person on this field. So please, Matteo Bargalli, it's your moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. So today I will present the dietary strategies for prevention of recurrent kidney stone disease. Just a brief introduction, why it is important to prevent kidney stones for three main reasons. First, it's a high prevalent condition in the general population, reaching up to 10-12% prevalence, and the prevalence and incidence are both on the rise for many reasons, including also changes in dietary habits and lifestyles. Second, is not an isolated condition, is associated with other comorbidities that are also influenced by diet, including obesity, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease. Third, is a high burden not only for the patient, but also for the healthcare system and expenditures, because as shown in this meta-analysis of randomized clinical trial, stone formers with 2 or more stone events had 3 times the risk for a new stone event compared with first-time stone formers. However, kidney stone disease, as well explained by Professor Gambaro, is not an unicum, but it's a spectrum of more phenotypes that shares different causes and clinical presentation. Therefore, for a personalized treatment, we have to start searching about the underlying mechanism. It is important to mention also this study recently published is in an unbiased cohort of Swiss kidney stone formers, which showed that only 11% of all stone formers had Mendelian disease or likely pathogenic variants that could explain the underlying nephrolithiasis. All the other patients had likely a multifactorial predisposition to kidney stones, which include environmental factors as diet. As said by Professor Gambaro, we have indeed many risk factors for stone formation that can affect both crystal nucleation and growth and aggregation, which includes urinary factors like urinary calcium, oxalate, and uric acid excretion, which can be considered promoters for stone formation. And we also have inhibitors that includes magnesium, potassium, citrate, and of course, urinary volume. Then all these factors can be highly manipulated through diet. Indeed, for this reason, all the nephrological and urological guidelines include dietary manipulation as in it. And these include high fluid intake with a circadian drinking, a balanced diet that should include fruit and vegetables, a balanced calcium intake, a limited amount of salt and animal protein intake, with also lifestyles indication for balancing excess fluid losses and maintaining a normal BMI. However, we have also to choose not only which prevention strategies, but how to apply prevention strategies in our patient. And this we have here 2 possibilities. So to start general preventive measures or to apply personalized treatment based on 24-hour urinary metabolic workup. Actually, here there is not much data. This is the only randomized clinical evidence in the literature, which analyzed more than 200 idiopathic calcium stone formers with up to 3 years of follow-up, and showed that patients in the personalized group had 3 times less the risk of a stone event compared to patients in the generalized prevention measurement group. So we can then suggest to perform a personalized approach, including 24-hour urine collection in all recurrent kidney stone formers, but also to first-time stone formers with additional risk factors, including systemic disease that can increase the risk as kidney stones, like gout, gut disease, or first-time stone formers with age below 25 or positive family history, kidney transplant or single kidney, or patient with osteoporosis or nephrocalcinosis, CKD, non-calcium stone formers, and patient with chronic urinary tract infections. Then I will start the core of this presentation today to speak about each dietary indication. We are currently saying our patient that they have to reach a urinary volume that should be more than 2.5 liters per day. Actually, this indication came from a randomized clinical trial from almost 30 years ago. This was a randomized clinical trial from Borghi, which enrolled 200 individuals with idiopathic calcium kidney stones, and patients were randomized to 2 groups, one with actually no dietary intervention, and the second with the indication of high fluid intake. And the follow-up was quite long, almost 5 years. As you can see in this cartoon on the right, the group with high fluid intake had almost 50% reduction in the risk of kidney stones. And the median urinary volume in this group was 2.6 liters. Therefore, we are then saying our patient to reach this value because it's this evidence. Now, more recent evidence, although this came from observational analysis, say that there is a linear association between the amount of fluid intake and the acceleration for incident kidney stones, so that it seems like there is a 13% reduction in the risk of kidney stones for each 200 milliliter of fluids consumed more per day. However, not all beverages seem to have the same effect on kidney stone risk, and this was shown by the group of Ferraro in 2013 with an analysis of 3 large Channing cohorts, a population-based analysis with up to 8 years of follow-up, which showed that the so-called soft drink, both sugar-sweetened non-cola, sugar-sweetened cola and punch, were all associated with increased variable risk for kidney stones. This was thought to be associated to the fructose content in these beverages, which may increase the excretion of calcium, oxalate, and uric acid, and then increase the risk of stone event. On the contrary, fruit juices seems to have no harmful effect on kidney stones, and on the contrary, orange juice seems to be protective in the same analysis. And this was then also confirmed by Odvina in 2006, which compared the effect of lemon versus orange juice in kidney stone formers with the same amount of fluids intake, and it was shown that orange juice had a more protective effect because it increased more urinary citrate, urinary pH, net gastrointestinal alkali absorption, and reduced more titratable acidity. This was explained by the fact that here in orange juice, the accompanying anion to citrate is potassium, which has a more alkalinizing effect. As said by Professor Gambaro, sodium intake is a fundamental indication for calcium stone formers. Indeed, as said, for every 100 millimole increase in urinary sodium, that means almost 5 grams salt intake per day, there is an increase in 1 millimole urinary calcium excretion. Interestingly, this analysis was valid both in 24-hour urines and also after an overnight fasting urine spot analysis, meaning that dietary calcium intake is not affected in this relation. Then this was later on proved in a study including the DASH diet and also a control diet, and in both groups, reducing the amount of sodium intake from 150 to 50 millimole per day reduced the urinary calcium excretion of half millimole per day. Therefore, it is highly recommendable to start a low sodium diet in patients with high sodium consumption and hypercalciuria. Although this could be really difficult to obtain, the goal should be less than 100 millimole of sodium per day in the urine, meaning less than 5 grams salt intake per day, but it could be difficult due to hidden sources of salt due to processed foods. As already mentioned by Professor Gambaro, regarding calcium intake, this was the Borky trial in 2002, in which 120 recurrent calcium stone formers and hypercalciuria were randomized into groups. One group with a low calcium intake, which means 400 milligrams per day of calcium intake, and the second group was on a normal calcium, balanced, so reduced animal protein, and reduce salt intake with a 5 years of follow-up. As you can see here, there was also here a 50% reduction after 5 years in the risk of kidney stone events. And this, as explained by Professor Gambaro, can be explained by the strong inverse linear association between dietary calcium intake and urinary oxalate. As you can see here in this slide, in both groups, at the end of the trial, there was a reduction in urinary calcium excretion. In the low calcium group, probably due to low calcium intake, and the normal calcium group due to low animal protein and low salt intake. However, the effect on oxalate was exactly opposite. There was an increase in oxalate excretion at the end of the trial in the low calcium group, and there was a reduction in urinary oxalate excretion in the normal calcium group. This can well explain the results of the trial. Therefore, it is advisable to have a balanced calcium intake of almost 1 gram per day, which seems to be protective of kidney stone events independently of its origin, dairy or non-dairy sources. As regards dietary oxalate, it is a a molecule with no physiological function in humans, and it is mainly eliminated through the kidneys, but a small proportion is also secreted intestinally. The contribution to urinary oxalate excretion mainly determined to hepatic metabolism of amino acids and also net intestinal absorption from diet. This second was initially thought to be very small, around 10%, but it was also seen that it's really highly variable depending on diet. And I have to mention that it's also very difficult to measure oxalate content in foods, and oxalate content in food itself can vary. A classical example is tea, in which the oxalate content varies with the brewing time and the harvesting time. This was a nice analysis of 12 healthy individuals from Wolf that shows the non-linear association between dietary oxalate intake and urinary oxalate excretion. These patients started with an oxalate-free diet, and we can see that for a small amount of dietary oxalate intake, there is an avid intestinal oxalate absorption. Then there is almost a linear association until we reach a plateau when we reach 200 milligrams of oxalate intake per day. So increasing this to 250 does not produce an increase in urinary oxalate excretion. However, as we can see here on the right, when we start a low calcium diet, so reducing dietary calcium intake from 1 gram to 400 milligrams per day, there was a further increase of 25% in urinary oxalate excretion. This was later confirmed in an analysis of 3 large American population cohorts with more than 4,000 incident kidney stones. Here, when comparing in men the highest versus the lowest quintile for dietary oxalate intake, there was an increased risk for incident kidney stone only in patients with a low calcium diet. In patients with normal calcium diet, even in the highest quintile, the risk was almost negligible compared to the lowest quintile. Therefore, it is always advisable to start a balanced calcium intake in calcium stone formers, and in patients with excessive intake, also to reduce the amount of higher oxalate food, which can include spinach, rhubarb, beets, seeds, and nuts. Regarding proteins, initially all the epidemiological studies showed contradictory results with both increase or reduction in the risk of kidney stone with the same amount of protein ingested. This could be well explained by the source of protein. Indeed, we know that meat and fish are rich in sulfur-containing amino acids that can give a fixed metabolic acid load. On the contrary, fruit and vegetables provide more alkali than acids. Indeed, we know very well that in case of overt metabolic acidosis, there is a reduction in urinary citrate excretion by increased consumption in the proximal tubule and increased reabsorption. At the same time, patients on a high animal protein diet are likely also on a diet low in fruit and vegetables, which will further reduce the amount of urinary potassium, magnesium, and citrate, which are all protective for kidney stones. This theory can be well explained by this analysis from Trinchieri in 2001, in which higher animal protein intake was associated with the potential renal acid load of food that can be measured with a food frequency questionnaire. Potential renal acid load of food was then directly and positively associated with urinary calcium excretion. And this association was thought to be mediated by both bone buffering, so bone resorption due to the acid load, but also to altered tubular calcium handling direct from the acid load with a vitamin D and PTH independent mechanism. We also say that fruits and vegetables are protective against kidney stones, and this can be well shown in this randomized clinical trial from Meschi, in which we had 2 populations, so healthy individuals and idiopathic calcium stone formers with hypocytraturia. There was the withdrawal for 2 weeks of fruit and vegetable in healthy individuals, and then we can see that there was a significant reduction in urinary magnesium, urinary citrate, urinary potassium, and a significant increase in calcium, ammonium, and also saturation, so calcium oxalate and calcium phosphate. On the contrary, in calcium stone formants with hypositraturia, the opposite happened at the end of the study. This was later confirmed in an observational analysis of the EPIC Oxford study with more than 50,000 participants and 300 incident kidney stones, and it was shown that low animal protein diet and vegetarian diets were the most protective against kidney stone disease. Red meat and poultry were indeed associated with increased risk of kidney stones, and high fruit intakes was indeed protective against kidney stone disease. So, summarize what we said until now is that the Western diet, which is rich in animal protein intake, high salt, and sugar-added soft drinks, is harmful for kidney stones. So, in principle, we can suppose that Mediterranean diet, which on the contrary is abundant in plant-derived foods, including fruits and vegetables, a moderate amount of dairy products, moderate fish and poultry, and low red meat intake could be protective against kidney stones. This was indeed showed by the analysis of Rodriguez and Ferrari in 2020 in the Channing cohort with more than 3 million person-year of follow-up and an alternative Mediterranean diet score calculated from food frequency questionnaire every 4 years. In this analysis, we can see here in the cartoon on the right, there was a significant inverse association between the Mediterranean diet score and the hazard ratio for kidney stone disease. Further, there was a trend for this association. That means that the higher the Mediterranean score, the lower the risk of kidney stones. Another interesting subgroup analysis for available 24-hour units further showed that patients with higher Mediterranean score had also higher urinary citrate, magnesium, urinary volume, and urinary pH. On the contrary, there was lower urinary sodium and supersaturation for all lithogenic salts. So in conclusion, we showed here that high animal protein intake, high salt, and low calcium diets are harmful against kidney stones, where a diet rich in fruit and vegetables is protective. Therefore, we should advise our stone patient to have high fluid intake, reaching 2.5 liters of urine volume per day, compensating fluid lossing with a circadian drinking, a balanced dairy product consumption, balanced protein intake favoring vegetable or animal proteins, restriction of the highest oxalate foods only in patients with elevated consumption, low sodium intake, and high fruit and vegetable intakes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Bargali. Your presentation was very fun and pragmatic because directly get the message to the nephrologist, because the nephrologist is the internistic part of the care of the kidney stone, because the urology, there are not always often very low nephrologist intervention. However, it's very, very, very interesting. But now I am very curious to hear the presentation of Professor Denis Gowell. He is currently the professor of the biomedical science and director of the division of science at the Tung Hua College, Hong Kong. It's very curious to send the presentation of Professor Denis Gowell. Please, the professor is.
Yes, thank you.
Popular bias, very funny.
Yes, thank you, Professor Velasco. So I'll just share my slide here. So I think most of the people, presenters have spoken about most of the diets, and I may be repeating here but luckily everything what I reviewed and what we have done also here have similar results. So I'm going to talk about something about popular diets, but I'm also going to touch upon my area of what I've been working with, herbal medicines also, because in Asia and Southeast Asia and many countries you will see people using, let's say, alternative or complementary medicines or therapies. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that because that is unavoidable. But the main thrust of my talk is how do you prevent recurrence or delay recurrence, is because once there's a saying that once you are a stone former, you're always a stone former. So I like to quote this person, Mr. Victor Linda, but it's a very old book, 1942, but it exactly says what we are going to be talking about. That is 90% of the diseases known to man are caused by cheap foodstuffs. You are what you eat. And this is very relevant because Professor Bolasco also mentioned about all the additives that are added, and it's an exhaustive list of additives that are added to food substances, and it gets into our body systems, and also our body has to deal with these additives also. So prevalence of urolithiasis is around 5 to 16% universally, depending on the countries and regions. And of course, we have talked about genetics. We've talked about environment. There's also socioeconomic factors also, because poorer people may not be able to afford protein, whereas let's say well-off people will eat protein on a daily basis. So that's a factor that to be taken into account. What we notice here is that the probability of recurrence after 5 years can almost reach 60%. It's not much different from other regions also. It's about 40, 50, 60%, but here it's around 60%. And every time the patient comes in and there's how can I prevent this in future? And we have to go into tell them dietary modification and compliance is the most important if you want to prevent a future recurrence. So this is the approach that I'll be talking about. So in my area, we have the use of traditional medicines that is normally adopted. And it's very widely marketed here. And it's also accepted by the government here. And it's also in the Western hospitals, we have the Chinese medicine clinic right next to each other. So the patient, you won't be surprised, is when they come for follow-up visits to the Western doctor, walks to the next clinic, the Chinese medicine, and takes medicine from there, hoping there's some prevention aspects to recurrence. So usage of such alternative therapies can be up to 40 or 85% in ethnic populations. And therefore, medical practitioners, when they are dealing with certain ethnic patients, it is good to know, are they taking any other supplements or alternative drugs or anything like that, that they may be combining with their traditional drugs also. So in general, I'm not going to go in detail, but I just want to say very clearly that there are three basic definitions of these herbs and phytochemicals. One is herbal medicines. These are specific. They have general pharmacokinetic effects, so they may either increase your urinary output of citrate or increase magnesium. They will modify your biochemistry of your blood and also urine output. There's also the nutrition-based modification of diets. So that's the naturopathic. Now, these could be ketogenic diets, high protein diets, so the Atkins diet. So these are modification of diets that is done on free will or by a nutritionist. And then there's the homeopathic, which is basically treatment of symptoms. So the last part is not important right now. The main two parts I will be talking about is the herbal medicine and naturopathic. When we look at why there is very little information of herbal medicines, is because when we look around literature, you'll see that most of the studies are being done in either in vitro, in urine, or in animal studies, and very few clinical studies have come out to show an actual effect. The most famous studied one is this one, and the second last one I'm pointing to is Philanthus neruri. Now, in fact, this herbal medicine has gone from in vitro studies to animal studies and even to clinical trials. And I'll talk about that in a moment. So several of these studies have gone from in vitro to animal. And the one that I talked about just now, Philanthus neruri, has been done in a clinical trial by Micheli and all. And they had found a very positive correlation of this herbal medicine to lower the stone risk and recurrence rate. And recently, we also had another study, and just recently, 5 years ago, 2020, concluded that there was a modest clinical efficacy of P. neruri in reducing stone burden. So this one drug is the most widely studied because it is quite safe. It doesn't have much side effects, and it is well tolerated by the patients, and they are able to take it, and it doesn't disturb with other Western drugs that they take. Now, in another trial, Brady and all did show a significant reduction of diameter of stones with another herbal medicine that A. repens. But after this paper, there has been no further news about this drug, although it did bring about increase in potassium citrate. And there's another drug, Ayurvedic drug, that came from India that also found there was a 33% reduction. Now, again, these two studies were clinical, but you go beyond this, there's not much further news about this drug or any clinical trials. So what do we see in the last 5 years? So starting from here to 2020. So I've looked up the 23 refereed publications with 34 open papers. Most of the countries contributing are US, China, Taiwan, India, Iran, Egypt, Japan, Oman, South Africa, and Russia. Of these papers, 50-odd papers, only 3 clinical trials were there. One from Turkey, one from China, and one from Iran. And these 3 clinical trials did show of the indigenous herbal drugs to claim positive efficacy with their respective herbal medicines. Now, problem here is most of these are indigenous herbal drugs, medicines that are not available universally. So it's difficult to do another clinical trials. Let's say from Turkey, I need to bring that drug over here, whether it'll be tolerated or not, because here they understand more Chinese medicine. So it's a cultural difference. So again, these studies are very limiting by their results, and they have their own drawbacks. So what is the problem? The problem is these drugs have complex mixtures. They have toxicity, whether they have good manufacturing practice, and whether they meet certain national or local certification. Study design is an issue. Compliance meaning not only the compliance for the products, but compliance for by the patients. Will they take it? If you're following them up after a stone incident for 2 years, whether they are complying or not. And because there's an increase in ESWL now, which is standard, there is less metabolic workup of the patients, including of their dietary or lifestyle habits. So we see this happening. So we see a patient coming in, they go through ESWL, and then they disappear. But at the same time, they start taking these medications, so herbal drugs, which are now going into some stages of early stages of development, which is characterization, chemical components, identification, and then finally marketing. And so these are the drugs that are fully regulated, and they are basically registered drugs. Now, Monti and Trincheri did a very good analysis of some of these herbal medicines. And what you see here is basically different researchers who have done clinical studies. And I'm not going to read the top column over there, but what the green dots, the blank, and the red dot means, the green dots means low risk in terms of randomization of the studies. The red dots means they were basically just cohort studies and no randomization, and there were biases in those. And in the blank squares, it was not able to determine whether there were low or high risk biases. So there were biases in this kind of studies. So when we look at the nutritional risk factors, we have liquids, we have diet, we have supplements, we have herbal medicine. This is what the patient is going to be exposed to once they have a stone episode. So what are the liquids? We have waters and juices. I'm not going to repeat what has already been said by the previous speakers, but we have an optimal water intake of about 2.5 liters, 3 liters a day. And in certain stones, 3.5 to 4 liters. Now, it's not easy to take in 2.5 liters or 3 liters. I mean, you're talking about a glass almost every 2 hours, so that is to keep up. But what people do is they complement the water with juices or colas, but that is another confounding factors. Because juices and colas and fructose has already been mentioned, it should be avoided. Fresh juices are good because they increase urinary citrate and magnesium, and they reduce sodium levels. So if they're fresh juices, they are quite good. One has to also adjust for occupation for fluid loss. If you're working in situations where there is high heat, sweating, a lot of fluid loss, you have to compensate that with fluid loss. And what we see in Hong Kong is because of some of the patients' occupations, we find high risk are the cooks, and also those people are the workers working out in the roads, construction workers and all that. We see a quite high percentage of them having renal stones, and basically it's because of fluid loss. Alcoholic drinks, when we look at it, beer, of course, is high purine, should be avoided. But then we have a study by Kurhan, who indicated reduced risk of stone formation from tea, beer, and wine, with wine being almost a 40% reduction. Sticking with liquids, there were several studies by Cordarella and Rogers about mineral water. And I think main thing about mineral water, and it's been mentioned already, is the bicarbonate. The bicarbonate has an alkalizing effect. So alkalizing effect increases your pH, increases your citrate, and reduces the oxalate. Juices is also by alkalization, but one has to be careful with certain juices like beetroot, or some fruits with high ascorbate amount, because the ascorbate will convert to oxalate. Soft drinks, one must avoid phosphoric acid. And tea and coffee, there was a large cohort studies by Siner, which mentioned about tea having a preventive role because of its diuretic effect. But one has to know which type of tea. So avoiding black or green tea because it has the highest oxalate amount. In terms of diet, it has already been mentioned, proteins. We have animal versus vegetable protein. It is well known that high protein will follow high sodium because sodium chloride is added. So this is a very high risk of renal stones. So we see a high dietary protein implicated in reduction in pH, acidity, reduction in citrate, increase in calcium, and basically it is supported by higher dietary protein with increased calcium from a study by Swingshackle and Ferraro. Carbohydrates, one has to look into what type of carbohydrates, glucose, fructose, sucrose. But I think right now the main one that is implicated is fructose. Fructose is used in many drinks, soft drinks and sweets and many packaged fruits. And they have been shown to have a risk factor for stone formation because of increase in calcium, increase in oxalate, and reduction in pH. For fats, we have seen quite inconclusive for fats. In general, the fats we look at is the arachidonic acid through phospholipids, and actually it's the prostaglandins that is cause hypercalciuria, and that was shown by Hirayama and as well as Baggio. Now in diet, we do see different type of diets, ketogenic diets, high protein diet, Mediterranean diet that was just now mentioned, vegetarian diets. But when I looked at review the literature, it was found that in terms of increasing risk of renal stones based on diets, and this paper is just from recent 2023, and we see that the high protein diets is the highest risk, then the ketogenic diet, then the vegetarian diet, and then the Mediterranean diet. Now, why the Mediterranean diet? Because it has the balance of the fish, poultry, olive oil, dairy, fruits, vegetables, and a moderate consumption of wine. I don't say wine is the main thing, but you can see if you swing a diet one way to the other, the too much animal protein or remove the keto part, you may compensate it with other types of dietary elements, and that may disturb your metabolism. What about supplements? People take vitamins. There is L-arginine, and now arginine has been shown to reduce the risk of stone disease. Certain vitamins, C and D, have been implicated in higher stone incidences because of oxalate, but B6 was found to be beneficial to women. Fish oils, basically EPA, was shown to reduce urinary calcium. So that was why in the Mediterranean diet, there is a moderate amount of fish, and that is because of this EPA. Probiotics, this was quite a big news in the 90s about Oxalobacter formigenes that is in your gut. It was anticipated if you take this, it will zap up the oxalate from the gut so that there's no oxalate absorbed. But it was found that in a study, in recent study by Kupisti, that it did not reduce the endogenous oxalate uptake or any change in oxaluria. So herbal or alternative medicines. So we know clinical trials are very sparse. There's not even one study that is randomized, placebo-controlled, double-blinded study. And I haven't seen any paper on that has been done like that. We've seen effects of phylum Pyracea as having no therapeutic agent. We've seen a systemic review of 55 clinical studies and found the results to be inconclusive. It is because these drugs are not available universally everywhere, so it's difficult to do it. It's very endogenous and country specific. So what is the diet? This is my last slide in conclusion. What is the dietary management for prevention of recurrence? It has to be individualized. Once you get a patient and you want to follow that person, you have to have an individualized, if you know the stone composition and metabolic evaluation has been done, a nutritional assessment should be done. The best way to do this is to do a dynamic 14-day dietary record of the patient. That will give you an indication of the type of fluids, protein, carbohydrates, sodium, oxalate, and a great range of metabolic data that the nutritionist can then work with that patient to prevent recurrence so that the recurrence doesn't happen soon enough, because it is probably diet in idiopathic stone form. It's probably the diet that is causing a problem. And local circumstances, or if it's an ethnic person, take into account the herbal or alternative treatment, because patients will go to these alternative therapies. In our studies here and in China, we found that 50 to 90% of the patients will go to alternative therapies. It will be good to have half-yearly metabolic evaluation of blood and urine as a follow-up. And following that can fine-tune the diet, because you can always fine-tune the diet. And with this, you could decrease the overall medical cost of imaging, hospitalization, and if recurrence comes later rather than earlier, that is even less hospitalization, and you even gain on, you don't lose on work time. So thank you very much.
Goal is a different point of view to carry this problem. It's very curious. I should know that if in China, in Orient, is population, isolated population with an high recurrence of kidney stones former, or are population that do not non-produce kidney stone. Exists some isolated population in our area. And second, I am very agree about the tailored diet on type of kidney stone compositions. And so for me, it is very interesting probably the association, because the very interesting of the philanthropy imagery for me is very, very interesting. In your area, there are some choice about herbal component. In your opinion, there are some people that have high recurrence, or some people that are not have recurrence. I am curious for God.
Yeah, so we are seeing, because we just finished one 3-year follow-up study, we are seeing a high recurrence of stones within, there's a 50% chance within 2 years they will have a recurrence. That's what we are seeing. It's also peculiar because here what they have is a habit of not, we try to push fluid and we can't get water through them, even mineral water, because we think alkalized water will be better. But here there's a habit of drinking tea. Whether it's day, night, morning, afternoon, for them fluids is tea, and we try to tell them that the black tea they're having is oxalates already. But we haven't done a study about moving one group of cohort to just water and one cohort to tea. We haven't done a study like that.
Very, very interesting about tea. Very interesting, and difficult to know some population, isolated population, like there are very, very, very scarce literature about, for example, in Turkey, there are populations that are in diet, culinary diets from heritage, habits from a culture of Islamic populations.
That's right.
Very difficult to. In your opinion, the herbal like herbal choice could be very useful to add the herbal to the
Yes. So in our clinical trial, we did see a benefit in the herbal because we looked at the blood parameters and urine parameters, which I did not show the results here because it's an old study that we did. In that, we found magnesium went up and citrate went up, and it was probably directly the effect of the drug causing the increase in urinary magnesium and urinary citrate. So that was the effect of that herbal medicine that we were working with. And that's the most popular one here in Hong Kong and in Southeast China, that medical. And we have done a little bit of chemical characterization also for that drug, and it's available in pill form here in the pharmacies without prescription.
Opinion could be useful to rise in the thyroid diet the content of magnesium.
Yeah.
This is not just estimated, underestimated the role of magnesium in your opinion.
The magnesium's role is basically what you get is a calcium oxalate. It will chelate with oxalate and be more soluble than calcium oxalate in the urine. So that's the role of magnesium in the urine. So what you get is oxalate taken away from the calcium so that the calcium oxalate does not precipitate out.
Oh, thank you. It's very any question from Professor Bargalli. Professor Bargalli, Professor Gambaro, my problem is in patients who are in therapy with vitamin D, cholecalciferol. In these people, from all the, of course, for all panel, is useful to this patient to to thyroid diet and to withdraw vitamin D or diminish the role of vitamin D. It's possible to what is your view?
Okay, for vitamin D, what we know is it increases basically hypercalciuria. That is well reported already. So, there has been vitamin D intoxication as well. So that is also well reported that it does cause hypercalciuria, bone resorption, and what you get is then you don't want calcium in the urine. So the vitamin D is not advised. But of course, you cannot avoid vitamin D, has to be taken, but in low doses, but not in high doses, because we had seen vitamin D intoxication with the wrong doses.
Oh, what do you think about Professor Gambaro, Professor Bargalli, about this problem of vitamin D, especially in human with severe osteoporosis?
Yes, Professor Velasco, after also answering this question, we see that Professor Gambaro has also his hand virtually rising. So Professor Gambaro, if you want to answer to this and also to place your question or your point.
Yeah, thank you. It is a question to you, Danny.
Yeah.
Did you investigate? It is very interesting that the compound that you isolated from an herbs has an effect on citrate, on urine citrate, because generally we manipulate the urine citrate with administering alkaline.
That's
potassium.
right.
Yeah, administering bicarbonate. But was there any effect of this compound on urine pH, on the systemic pH? Or may we speculate that it has an effect on some carrier in the proximal tubular?
Yes, so what we saw, we did see increase in pH. So that we did see. So there was alkalizing effect. We saw citrate level going up because of that. But however, we didn't see any change in the calcium value. So we didn't see any renal tubular reabsorption going on or any changes that we could see because the calcium levels were same, the before and after. So we saw a slight decrease in the calcium because of the high citrate. But when you see the actual calciuria, but we didn't see any difference.
Okay, thank you. I have it is obviously, and you pointed it out, very difficult to perform trials, very accurate, randomized trials in stone disease. So this is a great problem with these medicaments.
It is.
I saw that, for instance, the Micali papers on Philanthus niruri had 4 red points and only one green point.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's very few studies, and people will study only with their own local drugs around. So it's very difficult to do ethnic studies or interpopulation studies or multi-center trials also. It's very difficult.
Okay, I would like to ask to Matteo Bargagli another question. I saw the data from the plot from the Oxford study, and the fish eaters had almost a significant reduction of the risk of stones, correct?
Was not significant, and in the subgroup analysis there was actually no different in the fish or meat or poultry. There was almost the same in that study. It was almost the analysis of total protein intake, and the difference was almost on protein, that animal protein per se was associated with the risk. So the best was when the diet was less than 50 grams per day meat intake. Yeah.
But I was you didn't speak about omega-3 fatty acid.
Not omega-3 fatty acid, but basically eicosanophenoic acid, EPA. That has shown to actually reduce calcium. So there are studies out there on omega-3 fatty acids. I saw those studies even in the last 2 days. I can't recall right now. But on those studies, they're not conclusive. But the EPA studies are very conclusive. They do bring down the levels calcium.
And are there other from the panel on the other question? Because there are a question from Adamasco Cupisti, Professor Cupisti, that write systematic use of low sodium per day under 100 millimole day cannot be offered for implementation of high fluid intake. Apart from hypercalciuric patients, when a severe sodium restriction must be used in order to prevent calcium stone recurrences. The panel, imagine.
So the question is if reducing the sodium intake is useful also in form without hypercalciuria?
Yeah, hypercalciuria and the low intake of sodium.
Yeah, you know that the concept of hypercalciuria is not really correct, because there is a continuum of the risk of forming stones, increasing the calciuria. There is no threshold on the risk of stones. More than 300 is a risk, and less is not risky. Even 150 could be risky if and our approach, in my opinion, our approach to the prevention of stones with diet should be a complete approach addressing all the factors. And on the other hand, a sodium low diet is also a healthy diet, and it is very useful also for the prevention of osteoporosis, the cardiovascular disorders, hypertension, that are very frequent in stone formers. So I would suggest to every stone formers to reduce to the sodium intake.
Okay, but probably the problem of Professor Cupisti is it's difficult to use a systematic use of low sodium. The dye cannot be offered for implementation of high fluid intake. Probably is a problem of adherence to the patient, for the patient. Is right there. I don't know. There are some problems when a patient use for many months on a low sodium diet. Problem this patient to implement the high fluid intake. Probably is the sense of the question of Professor.
You are right. There is a great problem with the compliance, with the adherence to these suggestions to patients with stone patients. Also because most patients have recurrences not very frequently, so they stay in good health for years before the further recurrence. And this is a great problem for improving maintaining compliance to treatment. As Danny said, planning regular visits, checking, controlling the urine composition is a good tool to improve, to maintain compliance. But there are also problems with the fact that these medical suggestions are expensive. In Italy, for instance, there is no way to be reimbursed by the national health system for the metabolic evaluation of urine. And this is a problem, of course.
Yes, I think that the main enemy of the recurrence of kidney stone is the adherence of the patients, because the care, the prevention is for very number of months, for all years sometimes. Probably when I began a diet with alkalization on a pH over 6.5, 6.8, the production of new stones in kidney stone formers, in frequent kidney stone formers, is probably not, I don't know your experience, stop immediately the production of new kidney stone former. But in your opinion, also the previous kidney in the kidney could be reducing your volume and quantity?
Sorry, I haven't understood.
Okay, the main effect of the alkalinization of the care of the patient, water, alkaline water, citrate, magnesium, stopped the production of very new stones. But in the old stones, the therapy is possible to have an effect to rise the volume of previous kidney stones or now present in the patient.
Yes, I guess that the problem is when you use pharmacological doses of potassium citrate. But if with nutritional advice to increase citraturia, I think that you don't reach those pH, let's say 7.5, 7.5 that favors the precipitation of calcium phosphate, which is the most risky condition, adverse effect with citrate therapy.
What is the optimal pH for this patient for you?
Well, the theory tells us that the urine pH is not really relevant for the calcium oxalate. Yes. But if we are dealing with calcium phosphate, certainly we should not overcome a threshold of 7.5, 7, and
yes, of course, yes. And I don't know whether there are some other questions in my. There are no other questions. For conclude, I should make a consideration. The diet, the diet of the kidney stone form seems more to a patient with kidney renal chronic kidney failure, because this patient, especially with hypertension, because they are under 6 grams of sodium, and like in hypertension patient, control the amount of protein intake, because some patients are calculating intake of protein is over 1.6 grams per kilogram. Probably is necessary to lower rapidly, quickly the intake of protein. For me, is fundamental in this transplantation, of course. And so, yeah, I think that is it for the nephrologist is a problem. Common problem to treat chronic kidney patients and project the same procedure in patients with kidney stone forms, especially in frequent kidney stone forms. And so I think that I think that for me magnesium is under evaluated probably, because magnesium is the major element in our body probably. And so I don't know if you want to conclude with some expression of your experience. Or,
sorry, but with magnesium there is a problem of tolerance, and you cannot increase the supplementation of magnesium. This is a problem with this agent.
Yes, some patient stopped to drink water, and practically in one few months are the recidivant kidney stone. Oh, thank you for all panel. I am very happy to send my friend Giovanni and Matteo Bargalli. Especially, I am very curious to send to the opinion of Professor Goel that lives in Orient ambient environment. So I thanks to my colleague, and I hope to see you early. Thank you very much, and I conclude this webinar. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you everyone for this opportunity. It was a really interesting webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please check on the chat. You can access our survey. It will be very important for us to know how everything went. And thank you all the participants and also all the attendees.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
See you next time.